Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. For those who have just joined, welcome to our webinar today on securing Windows 10 and servers with attack surface reduction rules and baselines using Microsoft Endpoint Manager. By way of introduction, let me go ahead and introduce myself first. My name is Joe Stocker. I'm the founder and CEO of Patriot Consulting. We're a Microsoft cybersecurity partner in the United States. And Matt?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Matt Soseman. I'm a security architect at Microsoft, and I work with our security partners like Patriot to help them extend security solutions out to customers and help them be successful. So excited to be here.
Let's get into the agenda today. So Matt is going to take us through what are attack surface reduction rules and how they can really help you secure your organization. Following that, I'll go ahead and do a demonstration of how those ASR rules can be configured. We'll use the Microsoft Endpoint Manager to do the configuration. And we'll show you actually through a live demo of how those rules can be effective at blocking, executable files and scripts that attempt to download or run files, and preventing them from running obfuscated or suspicious scripts, and performing behaviors and apps that don't usually initiate, during, say, a normal day-to-day work activity. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Matt. He's going to walk us through what are Microsoft attack surface reduction rules.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. This is, I'm going to joke around here a little bit, but this is the best kept secret, in my opinion. So attack surface reduction rules are built right into Windows. And I believe it's Windows 10, 1809 or later. And if you're on Windows Server, it's 1809 or later Windows Server. And as you can see here on the screen, there's quite a few of these rules that are built in. And you can go through and actually enable these to provide different levels of protection. And so some of the favorite ones I have here are really when you think about low-hanging fruit. And what are some of the basic things you could do to help secure an environment and reduce that attack surface? So there's things like being able to block macro code in Office, being able to block Office from launching a child process. So if you maybe click on a link in a phishing email and you get that suspicious Word document, and the Word document launches some kind of a PowerShell command, well, that would be blocked. So as you can see, there's just a lot of low-hanging fruit, blocking unsigned processes from USB drives, so on and so forth. And what's really interesting about this is not only are they built in, but you can also manage these at scale. So you can manage them through group policy, through just PowerShell if you like, through Microsoft Endpoint Manager, or if you have a different MDM managing that Windows workstation, you can use that as well. So it's very flexible. And then the last thing I'll mention about this is you may be wondering, well, if I turn all these on, are they going to break my environment? And every environment's different, obviously. And so these have a audit mode and audit capabilities so that you can put them into audit mode, and it will actually run a report to tell you what would this break or what would be the impact from an application if this rule were to be enabled. And then from there, you can add exclusions and you can fine tune them. So extremely flexible, but also extremely powerful. And those are the attack surface reduction rules kind of at a high level. And Joe's going to go through a little bit deeper on this. But Joey, I think there's one other requirement, though, that we want to make sure that we call out. And it does require Microsoft Defender Antivirus to be enabled, and the definitions and anti-malware updates are up to date. And so some of these rules do use threat intelligence feeds from Microsoft. And so obviously Defender AV is going to be required for that. Now, if you're running another AV as a primary, this can run passively, and we can talk more about that in another webinar. But that is the major requirement here. And also remember, it's Windows 10, 1809 and later, and Windows Server 1809 or later.
Thank you, Matt. And Matt, I wanted to kind of interact with you a little bit on the slide. There's
Sure.
a couple of call outs. One is, I love that you mentioned audit mode first. That's definitely a best practice. So even though you could certainly come in and turn all these on and block right out of the gates, our typical standard deployment methodology is to go with audit mode, and then following that, you look at the log, see what was blocked. And the Microsoft 365 Defender portal actually has some really nice audit reports on ASR that clients can actually see some of the results. But one of the ones I wanted to mention, if you're using SCCM, so System Center Configuration Manager, which is, now Microsoft Endpoint Manager, Configuration Manager, do not enable this particular rule because this agent, the SCCM agent, relies upon WMI. And so if you were to turn this on, you would actually, disrupt communication with WMI. Now, the good news is this is in the process of being broken up into a couple of rules. So that way, for those of you that want to block PS exec specifically, because a lot of malware and ransomware threat groups do use PS exec for lateral movement, you'll be able to, soon be able to implement just the PS exec portion of that. Well, maybe not the WMI. But if you don't have SCCM, it's really important, I think, to block these calls, because both of these are used for lateral movement quite a bit. Another one I wanted to mention, just maybe some best practices from what we've seen. Out of all the rules, the one that in particular has caused a little bit of disruption is probably this bottom one here, blocking credential stealing from the local security authority. What we found is that organizations that turned this on too quickly, that didn't go in audit mode first, they found things like the Google Chrome updater service, believe it or not, wants to touch LSAS. So that's a legitimate service, and now why they want to touch LSAS, I don't know. But if you were to, turn this rule on too hastily, there's some legitimate apps that need to talk to this. So again, that just really underscores the importance of going audit first. Outside of that, a few other things, that I would mention is Windows 10 E5 does add these two specific rules. So if you're at the E3 level versus E5, you would need E5 if you wanted to prevent Adobe Reader from launching a child process. Like, does a PDF, Matt, ever really need to launch PowerShell or WScript?
Right.
Probably not, right? And so there's a lot of value in E5. This one in particular is actually quite interesting. This one, blocking executables from running it unless they meet a prevalence, age, or trusted list criteria. This actually really sounds a lot like AppLocker. AppLocker is a whitelisting solution in Windows that prevents executables from running unless they're signed or trusted. And so the difference with this is, think about AppLocker as something that you have to really maintain a list of applications, that are trusted. And so it's really up to you. Whereas this is using the cloud. It's using Microsoft's intelligence of executables that are trusted. So this is much more of a cloud AppLocker-ish solution, if you will, which is really quite powerful. Another thing I think that's worth mentioning is really around when it comes to the fact that people are probably entitled to turning this on. There's a big difference on the reporting. If you don't have Defender for Endpoint and you turn on auditing, all of the audits for these activities are going to be sent to the local event logs, which are not useful for enterprise administrators. How would you go and gather that? You'd have to set up, event log, forwarders and collectors and all that sort of thing. But when you combine attack surface reduction rules with Defender for Endpoint, you'll actually get a portal where you could actually centrally view all of those things. So for example, in the device timeline view, I can click on filter, and I can filter just on the attack surface reduction rule events. So we're getting a cloud repository, a database, if you will, pulling those events from all the workstations without having me to deploy like a Sysmon agent or some sort of log collector on all the endpoints. So we wanted to really make sure that was clear today, that yes, while it is possible for you to turn this on without Defender for Endpoint, you wouldn't really have a way to report centrally on all the data if you didn't have it. So want to make sure that that's really clear there. Okay. Another thing, I think that's really worth mentioning is the other value of getting that all, centrally collected is the amount of data here that you can go back to is 6 months. So you literally have 6 months, of data going back, which is pretty helpful. Now, let's actually get into the demo, and let me describe what we're going to look at. We're going to use Microsoft Endpoint Manager to enable attack surface reduction rules. And then we're going to look at security baselines and how those can incorporate those as well. And then we're going to actually simulate a few threats so you can actually see this work. And I already kind of gave you a sneak peek of the portal that can be used to, see if those alerts are getting triggered. But let's go ahead and switch over to Endpoint Manager. And so in this is endpoint.microsoft.com is how you get over to Endpoint Manager. And then you'll click on Endpoint Security. And once you're in endpoint security, you'll click on attack surface reduction. From here, you'll create a policy, and then you'll select the platform, in this case, Windows 10 and later. And then we have a few different options. So we're going to spend most time on the attack surface reduction rules, but I think it'd be helpful if we actually touched on some of these additional security capabilities here too. So we're going to go ahead and select attack surface reduction and click create. And then that's going to give us a little wizard here. So we'll call this ASR rules. Go next. And here's the settings that we just saw on that slide. So do we want to block persistence through WMI event subscription? So we can go ahead and say, yes, we'd like to start with auditing that. Do we want to block the applications from touching the LSAS service? So LSAS, for those that don't know, this is the security service that leads to the area of memory where passwords are stored. And so tools like Mimikatz, would like to be able to, read that area of memory. There's technology from Microsoft called AccountGuard that will move that area of memory down and to a protected into the hypervisor layer of memory. But the latest version of Mimikatz is able to bypass AccountGuard. And so from a security standpoint, we're really now relying primarily on this rule here to prevent Mimikatz from accessing it. There's also a new attack mat called Pass the PRT. And Pass the PRT I've tested is successfully blocked by this rule as well. So this rule is effective against Pass the PRT and Mimikatz. But as we mentioned earlier, it is important to enable it first because there are several applications typically in a common enterprise environment that will want to touch the local security authority. Blocking the Adobe Reader from child processes, as we mentioned, that does require the E5 Windows 10 E5 license, right? And blocking Office applications from injecting code into another process. So do you really want Microsoft Word to be able to do like process hollowing on other, applications running? Probably not. So, but again, just to be safe, we're going to, get these all in auditing. Preventing Office from creating executable content. I'm going to go a little faster here. Blocking Office from creating a child process, like maybe a PowerShell script or a VB script. And blocking Win32 calls from Office macros. Blocking Office communication apps from child processes. So this is primarily the, I believe, like Teams and Skype. Blocking execution of obfuscated scripts. So this is where the attacker's trying to really hide keywords like execute and those sorts of things. So they'll use a variety of different techniques to do that. We also have the AMSI technology built in to Windows that can also detect those too by recompiling them and then scanning them. JavaScript and VBScript. Blocking process creations from originating from PSExec and WMI. Blocking unsigned and untrusted processes running from USB. Now, this is interesting because we actually have probably 5 other different things that we can do with USB. We can actually block USB altogether. We can block it based on hardware ID. We have other device control capabilities. This to me is a nice middle ground because if a USB drive does not contain an executable, right, and if it's just files, then the USB natively doesn't really present a threat unless a user goes in and double clicks that executable or copies, maybe malicious files. So what this is doing is it's actually just preventing what could be harmful on the USB from launching, and it would then allow documents to be copied off. So it's a really nice middle ground, I think, that this provides for device control capabilities. Blocking executable content download from email and webmail clients. So someone going to say Gmail or Hotmail and they're on an enterprise managed device, you want to maybe prevent executable content from being downloaded from those websites. Advanced protection against ransomware is looking at the executable to see if it's resembling the types of things that ransomware does, like encrypting files and whatnot. So it's looking at the behavioral characteristics of an executable to determine if it's ransomware. Folder protection. So this is basically preventing apps from trying to modify typically it's your desktop and your My Documents folders, so the places that you actually store documents. This is a little bit more of a whitelisting type solution where you do have to maintain a list of executables that would be bypassed from this one. So this is similar to our concern with local security authority, where there's a lot of applications that want to try to touch this one. This is the other one that you kind of have to watch out for, is folder protection, because I use like Notepad++ and TextPad. Those would be prevented from accessing my documents folder unless I actually exclude them. So you might have a different profile, Matt, for high value targets where you're more selectively applying this to, because of the overhead necessary to maintain those kind of whitelisted apps. So in an enterprise enrollment, we typically don't see this one rolled out as much because of the overhead required to maintain, that list. So that might be an example of something that might stay perpetually in audit for a large organization, if that makes sense. Okay, so you could assign scope tags if you wanted to further isolate it. You select the users and groups that you want to apply this to, and then you basically just click on review and create. So that's basically the process of using this. Now, the assumption here, because we went right into endpoint.microsoft.com, is that your devices are actually enrolled into Endpoint Manager. It's kind of beyond the scope of today's conversation to kind of get into what's required for that to occur. But it could be self-enrollment, like someone could actually go in and enroll through Windows 10. You can directly enroll. Could be via group policy. Can also be via configuration manager. So where you can actually enable co-management, and that lights up this capability. So a few different ways to actually get your devices onboarded for this to take effect. So that's basically the process of get it going. The other thing we wanted to talk about was security baselines. So security baselines provide Microsoft's recommendations for security for Windows 10, for Defender for Endpoint, and for the Microsoft Edge browser. So we're not going to really, in this webinar, get too deep at all really into Defender for Endpoint or Edge. We've done several past webinars on Defender for Endpoint, so you could check out those webinars if you're interested on that. Today we're going to talk about the Windows 10 security baseline, and what we're going to show you is that you can create a baseline based on Microsoft's recommendations for securing Windows 10. So we'll call this the Windows 10 December 2020 baseline, since that's the last time it was updated. Here was December 2020. And then here's all the various settings that you can actually go in and implement. And so there's some really good recommendations in here, Matt, like should we prevent the password from being saved in a remote desktop session? Absolutely. We wouldn't want someone to come along later on an endpoint and see, this highly privileged password being stored, in a file that can be retrieved, right? So this is an example of why we might not want to allow password saving. There's all sorts of different things that we can harden, like enabling smart screen and preventing someone from ignoring the smart screen warning. So smart screen, it's a browser integration natively built into the Edge browser, but is also available as an extension to Chrome. And I found it extremely effective when I'm going out there trying to do security testing and trying to download something. If Smart Screen's enabled, it's oftentimes going to say, hey, that's Mimikatz, you can't download that. And if you're blocking the user from bypassing that, that's a great layer of defense in and of itself. It's not going to prevent all threats, but as a combined layer, it's pretty good. Yeah, so there's lots of different things that you can actually do. This PowerShell script logging is really nice because a lot of threat actors like to use PowerShell, so you can actually log exactly what was run on the machine, the full command line history, and again, lots of great recommendations enabling a firewall on the device, enabling encryption, BitLocker. All sorts of different recommendations. But Matt, I wanted to have a discussion with you. In our experience at Patriot, when we've deployed the security baseline to organizations, this probably goes back 20 years of history. Microsoft has had security baselines for many, many, many years. When we've gone to deploy them, oftentimes out of the box, it actually can be disruptive. There can be applications that stop working. And so the approach that we've taken has really been around picking and choosing which of these controls are an organization likes, and then we'll actually create a custom configuration profile to do that. So we're kind of showing this like a menu of, hey, here's all the options, which ones are really important to you, and then so we'll kind of selectively pick and choose from here as opposed to turning them all on. But Matt, I'd love to hear your perspective on that, and you also came from the consulting services as well. So
yeah, I mean, gosh, back in the day, years ago when I was in consulting, we didn't have anything like this. There was actually GPO templates and everything to be able to apply baselines, and things have come a long way. What I like about baselines and Endpoint Manager is it answers the question of Microsoft, how would you do it? So if you're to ask, Matt Soseman at Microsoft, how would you apply a security baseline to a Windows 10 computer? I would tell you everything that is in here is what we would recommend. Now, again, and as you point out, Joe, that kind of, there's reality and then there's like the best case scenario. What I just described as best case scenario. In reality, you can certainly come through here and you can customize it. And I think that's really the benefit here is let's go through and create a baseline that works for the customer, that's unique to their environment, and provides a level of protection that they want. And if you use this as a template, again, going back to that question of how would Microsoft do it and what would they recommend, this will give you a lot of ideas for how to approach it. And again, not everything is 100% secure, and we can't think of everything, but this will give you a lot of great ideas to start building up that baseline for you and your environment. So that's what I like about it. In my experience with this, it's kind of both worlds, right? I've got customers out there that have used this, and this is a journey to be able to get to this point, obviously, because you don't want to break anything in the environment. I've had customers that do just what you said, Joe, and go out and kind of create their own baseline via configuration policies, but it uses some of the settings from here. So just you clicking around in here, I mean, there's a ton of great stuff that should absolutely be understood, should be analyzed a little bit more, and you should know what some of these do. Like you point out, Smart Screen. I'm always talking about going back to the basics with cybersecurity. Just turn on Smart Screen, but understand limitations, understand if it's going to break anything, and then craft your baseline around that.
Yeah, totally. I think you made some really excellent points, and I think a lot of customers, as they're seeing this, they're probably watching this, saying, oh yeah, that does make a lot of sense in terms of blocking connections from non-domain networks. That seems pretty intuitive. But if you have that merger and acquisition going on and network teams doing some integrations, you really have to kind of understand the environment quite well before doing that. We do have a question coming in. I'm going to just read the question really quick. Currently, we have the ASR rules on, but they haven't enabled by the configuration profile endpoint protection. So I'll show what that mode is. Do you advise moving from that kind of config style over to the ASR section? So let me sort of describe what the question is. So what we're showing here is, we previously went into endpoint security, we went to ASR, and then you'll also notice you can also deploy it via security baseline. So there's a bunch of the ASR rules here. And then there's a third location where it could be turned on as well. So if I go over to devices and I go to configuration profile and I go to create a new profile, in here, if I create a endpoint protection profile, so if I go to Windows 10 and go to settings, I should have an option in here for endpoint protection. And inside, if I create this profile for endpoint protection, I should be able to see the similar attack surface direction rules under exploit guard, right? So there's essentially three different ways you can actually push ASR with endpoint protection. So the question came in, which one is right? I would say if you are going to do the baseline rules and just deploy that, which again wouldn't be my recommendation in general. There's exceptions to that where it might make sense, but in general, what I've been doing is I've been taking those configurations and I've been coming in here and I've been using these configuration profiles to implement selectively the things that I like from the security baseline. So I guess to answer the question, I historically have been coming here. But what you're noticing over here in this endpoint security is you're noticing this really nice sort of menu of here's the best practices. You got your AV, you got it all sort of centralized here. So you could certainly come in here and do it as well. I've been talking with the product group. There's a lot of debate on, how to get people that have been configuring it in the old configuration profiles, how to, is there going to be a migration path to kind of push it all over here? In general, the product group that I've spoke to, and again, it's a huge organization, but in general, they're guiding clients to kind of do it here on a go forward basis. But if you've been doing it in the older, sort of way by going into, again, device configuration, that's okay too. This is a legitimate way to do the configuration as well. But I guess if you're starting from scratch, they'd like to see you do it here. And I think there's some talk of potentially, again, this is Joe talking, not Microsoft here, but I think there's some talk of potentially getting to a place where everything can kind of come over here at some point. And I don't know if that's 2 years out or how far out, or even if that'll happen. But that is a common question of, where do I build it? Do I build it in configuration profiles or do I build it here? Right now, you have a choice. You could do it in either location, but if you're starting from scratch, you'd probably do it here. I guess, Matt, any feedback or thoughts?
Yeah, that's about it. I mean, it's a journey, and a lot's changed over the years. Back when this was in tune, and even before then, new capabilities getting added. This eventually will probably be the spot. But yeah, if you're doing this from scratch for the first time, I would start here. It's a little easier to navigate than the configuration profiles.
Yeah.
Again, it's kind of preference, but that would also set you up just on the safe side in case this does become the new method.
Yeah.
Yep.
So there is a way that you can actually turn these on in without Endpoint Manager. If you wanted to start experimenting just on one machine, and let's say Matt, that you have not enrolled into Endpoint Manager, maybe you don't own it or whatever reason, but you want to start playing with some of these attack surface direction rules. There's actually a way that you can actually turn these on via script. So, or either group policy or other configuration tools. And so these are the ways that you would do it is based on these GUIDs, and each GUID, in the Microsoft documentation, refers to a different rule. So this one, may be like the LSAS rule or something. And so you can go in and you can actually enable the rule on a per rule basis. You can also turn them on into audit mode with this way as well. So this would be something maybe in a lab, or if you wanted to experiment on a machine, and then you could actually go into PowerShell and do a get command. So you can do a get preference, and using this little trick, a select expand property allows you to see which of the GUIDs are currently enabled, because otherwise if you just run it as a get MP preference, you'll see it's all kind of concatenated here. So if you do the select expand feature, that allows you to actually see all the GUIDs that are enabled. And again, the Microsoft documentation will delineate which of the GUIDs are effective. But this is one way that you could actually go and turn it on. Once you actually have the rules enabled and you want to test, there is a Microsoft site, like a demo site, where you can actually go and actually run, basically download some of these attachments to test some of these, right? And so these test files, if at this demo.wd.microsoft.com, these actually allow you to simulate to see if these are actually triggering. And Actually, on the right, this is actually interesting. I didn't know this. I just noticed they just added this. It looks like some of the older ASR rules are effective all the way back to 1709. So that's actually cool. I just observed that. And then some of the newer ones are at the 1803 and higher. So that's cool. But I'm going to go ahead and run some of these. Now, one of the ones that is the actual script, so like the PS exec kind of command, I'm going to go ahead and trigger that. Okay, so I've downloaded one of those scripts, and so if I do a C script, tsr.vb script, so I'm going to go ahead and execute this. And so on my other screen here, it actually says that the Windows security has blocked this. So it actually prevented Notepad from launching. So the ASR rule blocked that. Now, if I look at what was this script, it was basically a VB script attempting to spawn, an executable. So pretty simple. It's just this WMI call to the Win32 process. But that might be the type of thing you don't want running on your systems. Now, if you have an older enterprise that is running login scripts, I remember Matt writing login scripts and VB scripts. So if you have those old scripts still running as login scripts, then and if they're running executables, this might be an example of something you need to go in audit mode first until IT can convert those to use other processes. But that's just an example of one of the many reasons why we recommend going audit mode. Okay, so that's this impede the JavaScript and VB script from launching executables. Blocking Win32 from macro and Office. So, and then we've got the blocking Office applications from creating executable content. So it's going to download this particular file. I go to open this file, and then I go to enable this, and so that is blocked. So there's kind of a cool little testing page here. I'll go ahead and copy this over to the Event Builder chat as well, so you guys can actually test your ASR rules. Files for testing ASR. Okay, so that's now in the chat. Looks like we do have a couple of questions that have come in. How would you advise to have certain ASR rules turned on for all devices, but then you need to exclude it from certain devices? So if we get into the policy, I'll go ahead and pull one up. So we should have a endpoint protection policy here. Who it's applied to. I think I clicked too fast and broke the portal. Okay. All right. So if we get into assignments, you'll notice we have this assignment of, device groups or groups that contain devices, and then you have this excluded group here too. So you could basically, to the answer to the question, you can basically, have a group of computers to exclude, and then you could build a different profile, for those other groups. And then I believe, there's also reporting available, Matt, for viewing ASR, almost at a reporting level. So I'm going to get that loaded here as well. But before I load that up, I wanted to show maybe again how enabling the ASR rules is wonderful, but if you don't have a centralized place to go and view them at, that's challenging, right, for a large organization. So I think the value that the Defender for Endpoint provides is it aggregates the ASR rules centrally. And I believe that's also a pretty strategic competitive advantage over other EDR platforms too. I think this is unique, Matt, in the marketplace as far as being able to gather the ASR events. And I think we'd agree, the ASR rules that we all saw being natively built in the OS are very effective, security controls, but being able to get in here and view them. So we get into one of these. Let's look at this particular one here. So we've got this particular event. So the print spooler, is attempting to launch an executable, which is obviously quite questionable. Why should a print driver, or print spooler, attempt to run child processes? That looks quite suspicious. So again, ASR is showing that. This is kind of going a little bit beyond, but I think just showing the fact that it's not just this timeline on an individual device, but being able to click on hunt for related events. And then you can write a Custo query language query to say, how many other devices in my organization, are behaving that way. So that ability to really hunt and find, other devices at scale is quite nice there. We actually go into, we have a couple of questions coming in as well. Let me go to those. Matt, what's kind of the go-to ASR rule if you can only turn on, a couple of those? Like, what's the one that, in your experiences, and I could maybe bring up the slide again here. That's the question. So if let me go pull these back up.
It's a tough choice.
It's the pick, right? Yeah.
It's a tough choice. I mean, there's someone here that you might look at, like the LSAS one, block credential stealing. You might think, oh, that's easy. Well, it turns out that can impact a lot, right? In my personal experience, just throughout the years, the one that I found is blocking macros in Office. Block 132 imports for macro code in Office. And then I'll combine that with block Office apps from launching child processes. It's extremely rare that an end user will be doing that unless you're somebody that's in accounting or working with spreadsheets that have advanced formulas with macros. And that doesn't mean you want to apply it globally. You certainly could, but it does mean kind of profiling your users and understanding who are the ones that are at most risk, who don't use these capabilities in Office that we might want to apply this to. But those two are the ones I found to be kind of low-hanging fruit. The third one I would add to that is block untrusted unsigned processes that run from USB. A lot of organizations, especially back in my consulting days, had they had that at the time, that would have stopped them from putting glue in the USB ports and doing all sorts of crazy stuff to block USB drives.
Right.
But that could be a great one as well. But Joe, I mean, we always talk about defense in depth, and this is definitely something you want to have in your tool belt. It's just such a basic thing. Just make sure you do it right. Make sure you're auditing first. Make sure you're understanding where this is being applied. Plan. Do a pilot or a POC, but apply to the group of users that it makes sense to, and don't apply to ones that don't.
Perfect. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah.
And then some additional reporting that's available. So security.microsoft.com is the new sort of central one-stop shop portal where all the security products, all the Microsoft Defender security products are currently being consolidated. So for example, if you're running Defender for Endpoint, that is managed here. If you're running Defender for Office, that's managed here. And the next one I think we're going to see coming in here most likely is going to be Microsoft Cloud App Security. At some point will be coming over as well. But if you come down here and you click on reports, there's a report that you can actually run in here. The very first report that's listed, it's the security report. It actually shows you the attack surface reduction rules that the Defender for Endpoint has found, and It shows you how many of them are running in block mode and how many are running in audit mode. So you can get a really good indication for your enterprise. I've got, 21 devices in block mode, and then I've got these 21 are in audit mode. So it really helps you, visualize your overall configuration at a high level, and then how many detections that ASR rule have blocked versus audited. And then you could drill in and see the detections. You can add exclusions, based on that. So if there's some false positives. So this security portal, is another great place to go. And again, if you needed to get down into the specific details on an endpoint, getting into this endpoint, getting into the device inventory, the timeline view, or actually writing a hunting query to look for those. So this is all now centralized at security.microsoft.com.